With trembling hands and a flashlight tucked beneath her chin, Sarah Caldwell extracted the crumbling leather journal from the cavity behind the barn wall, unwittingly holding the key to a centuries-old mystery that had confounded historians and treasure hunters alike. The forgotten diary of Nathaniel Bishop, hidden for over 200 years, would not only rewrite colonial American history, but would lead to the discovery of Revolutionary War artifacts, deliberately concealed by founding fathers to protect a secret that could have changed the outcome of a nation's birth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we continue this extraordinary story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're already intrigued, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's video will reveal evidence that shocked museum curators and forced prestigious universities to revise their historical texts. The September sun cast long shadows across Ironwood Farm as Sarah Caldwell supervised the renovation crew dismantling the ancient barn's damaged north wall. The massive oak beams, blackened with age and warped from 2 centuries of harsh New England winters, creaked in protest as workers carefully removed each hand-hewn plank. The 1780s structure had withstood countless storms, but last month's lightning strike had finally compromised its structural integrity beyond repair. Sarah hadn't planned on renovating the old barn this year. Her carefully constructed budget for the struggling family farm prioritized essential equipment repairs and the mortgage, not historical preservation. The lightning strike had forced her hand, and the insurance settlement barely covered half the restoration costs. Her husband Michael's deployment with his National Guard unit to assist with hurricane relief efforts down south meant Sarah was managing everything alone, from the farm's daily operations to this unexpected construction project. "Mrs. Caldwell, you might want to see this," called Luis, the restoration foreman, his voice echoing inside the cavernous barn. "We've found something unusual in the wall." Sarah made her way across the dirt floor, navigating around piles of salvaged wood and renovation equipment. Luis stood beside an exposed section of the interior wall, pointing to a peculiar gap between the outer planking and inner structure. "There's a hollow space here," he explained, "and it looks deliberately constructed, not just a quirk of the original building. Someone made this cavity intentionally." Sarah peered into the dark recess. The space was about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, tucked between support beams in a section that would have been impossible to detect without removing the outer wall. The flashlight on her phone revealed what appeared to be the edge of something leather-bound. "Can you reach it?" she asked, her historian's curiosity piqued. Before taking over her family's struggling farm 5 years ago, Sarah had been pursuing a doctoral degree in early American history at Amherst College. Though she'd set aside her academic ambitions when her father's sudden illness required her return to Ironwood Farm, her passion for historical mysteries had never waned. Luis, carefully, extended his arm into the narrow opening, straining to reach the object. "It stuck. Wait, got it." He extracted a dust-covered package wrapped in what appeared to be oilcloth, deteriorated but still somewhat intact after centuries of protection within the barn wall. Sarah accepted the bundle with reverence, carefully, unwrapping the brittle protective covering on a nearby workbench. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but remarkably preserved, along with a small wooden box, approximately 6 inches square, secured with a tarnished brass latch. "Should we call someone?" Luis asked. "The Historical Society, maybe?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes never leaving the journal. "Let me take a look first. If it's historically significant, we'll definitely notify the proper authorities." She recognized her response as the academic in her rather than the practical farmer she'd become. The responsible course would be to immediately report such a find, but something about the deliberate concealment of these items made her hesitate. As the restoration crew returned to work, Sarah carefully transported the journal and box to the farmhouse kitchen. Under better light, she could see that the journal's leather cover bore a name and date embossed in faded gilt lettering: Nathaniel Bishop, 1779. The name sent a jolt of recognition through her. During her graduate studies, she'd encountered references to Nathaniel Bishop, a colonial merchant and suspected Revolutionary War spy whose activities had been largely undocumented despite his apparent connections to several founding fathers. Historians had long debated his role in early American politics, with some suggesting he had been entrusted with sensitive missions directly from George Washington, while others dismissed him as a minor figure whose importance had been exaggerated. Over time, with careful fingers, Sarah opened the journal to its first brittle page, where elegant script declared, "Herein I commit the true account of matters which, for the security of our nascent nation, must remain concealed until such time as the Republic is beyond threat of dissolution. May God forgive my silence, and history understand my discretion." Her heart quickened. This was no ordinary diary, but something deliberately preserved for posterity. A first-hand account from a Revolutionary-era figure who had expected his words to eventually come to light. The small wooden box, when carefully opened, contained a tarnished silver medallion bearing unfamiliar symbols, a folded document sealed with red wax but too fragile to unfold without proper conservation techniques, and a brass key of unusual design. Sarah's phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Video call in 10 minutes. Miss you. How's the barn renovation going?" She glanced at the journal and artifacts, suddenly uncertain about sharing her discovery, even with her husband. Whatever Nathaniel Bishop had hidden in her barn wall had been concealed for a reason. Possibly reasons of national security in the fragile early days of the United States. Before broadcasting its existence, even to loved ones, she needed to understand exactly what she'd found. "Great, can't wait to see you," she replied. "Renovation on schedule. Tell you all about it soon." As evening approached after completing her farm chores and speaking with Michael, carefully keeping the journal out of camera range, Sarah settled at her kitchen table with the journal, a pot of tea, and her old grad school research habits resurfacing. She began taking methodical notes as she carefully turned each delicate page, growing increasingly astounded at the historical treasure she'd discovered. The journal detailed Nathaniel Bishop's role as part of a secret committee tasked by George Washington himself to conceal certain Revolutionary War artifacts and documents that, if discovered by British forces, could have identified colonial sympathizers still operating in British-controlled territories. More incredibly, Bishop described a collection of ancient relics and maps recovered from a British ship, artifacts that predated Columbus and suggested North American contact by European explorers centuries earlier than historically acknowledged. If authenticated, these revelations would force historians to reconsider the established timeline of American discovery. Even more intriguing, Bishop hinted at the location of these concealed artifacts, using a complex cipher and landmarks that Sarah recognized as potentially existing within the boundaries of what was now Ironwood Farm, her land. As midnight approached, Sarah set down her pen, her mind reeling. She had two choices: contact academic authorities immediately and surrender the journal to proper study, or follow the clues herself first to understand the full scope of what Bishop had concealed. The decision seemed obvious for a former historian with a deep respect for academic protocol. Yet as she traced her finger over Bishop's meticulous map of landmarks, many still recognizable on her property, Sarah found herself calculating how long it might take to investigate just the first location before alerting anyone else. Outside, a car's headlights swept across the farmhouse windows as a vehicle slowly drove past on the rural road. Probably just a neighbor, Sarah thought, though at this hour it was unusual. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She moved to the window in time to see a black SUV with government plates continuing down the road. Something about its deliberate pace sent an unexpected chill down her spine. Dawn broke over Ironwood Farm with a soft amber glow that belied Sarah's restless night. She had managed only a few hours of fitful sleep, her dreams filled with revolutionary soldiers and hidden chambers beneath her property. The journal lay on her bedside table where she had placed it after hours of reading, its revelations challenging everything she thought she knew about her family's land. After completing the essential morning farm chores, feeding the small herd of dairy cows, checking the irrigation system in the eastern field, and responding to urgent emails from their organic produce distributors, Sarah returned to the kitchen with a renewed sense of purpose. She spread out her notes alongside a detailed topographical map of Ironwood Farm, attempting to reconcile Nathaniel Bishop's 18th-century landmarks with the modern landscape. "The hollow elm at the convergence of two streams," she murmured, tracing the property lines. The old elm had fallen decades ago, according to her father, but its massive stump remained beside the creek junction on the northwest corner of their property. Bishop had described it as marking the first of 7 points in a specific pattern, a pattern that supposedly outlined the location of a hidden underground chamber. Sarah hesitated, her academic training battling with growing curiosity. Protocol demanded she contact the State Historical Society, or perhaps her former doctoral advisor at Amherst. Yet something about the black government SUV that had passed her house last night, now parked at the local motel according to Mrs. Lawson at the general store, made her uneasy. If Bishop's journal contained information of historical significance, shouldn't it be properly documented before potential interference? Just a preliminary investigation, she justified to herself, packing a small backpack with water, the journal, carefully sealed in a plastic bag, a measuring tape, compass, and her father's old metal detector from his weekend treasure hunting hobby. Simply verifying if there's anything to find before bothering the authorities. The September morning was cool, but promised afternoon heat as Sarah hiked across the familiar fields of Ironwood Farm toward the creek junction. The property had been in her family for 6 generations, though financial struggles in recent years had nearly forced them to sell. Only her and Michael's dual incomes, her managing the organic farming operation and his military salary, kept the bank at bay. The irony wasn't lost on her that the land might contain historical treasures while they struggled to make mortgage payments. The elm stump appeared much as Sarah remembered from childhood explorations, a massive gnarled remnant nearly 5 feet across, its wood silvered with age. The convergence of the 2 small streams had created a natural clearing dappled with morning sunlight filtering through the canopy of surrounding maples and oaks. Sarah consulted Bishop's journal carefully, turning to a page containing a hand-drawn map. According to his instructions, she needed to position herself on the north side of the stump at the exact point where the 2 streams met and take 37 paces at a heading of 43 degrees. Following the journal's directions with her compass in hand, Sarah counted carefully as she walked through the underbrush. At the 37th pace, she found herself standing before a moss-covered rock formation that protruded from the gently sloping ground. Nothing about it seemed unusual or promising, just another natural feature of the woodland landscape. Consulting the journal again, she read, "Where waters converge and the silent sentinel stands, seek the stone that bears the mark of man amidst nature's random hand." Sarah brushed away layers of moss from the rocks, examining each surface carefully. On the 3rd stone, her fingers detected something different, not the natural irregularities of weathered rock, but deliberate grooves. clearing away more vegetation, revealed what appeared to be a crude carving, a circle bisected by a vertical line with 3 horizontal hash marks crossing it. "The mark of man," she whispered, excitement building. This was exactly what Bishop had described, a trail marker used by his secret committee. According to the journal, this marker indicated that she needed to continue 15 paces at a new heading of 120 degrees, which would lead to the next marker in the sequence. The pattern would eventually reveal a specific location where the Earth guards secrets in its hollow embrace. For the next 2 hours, Sarah meticulously followed the trail of cryptic instructions and hidden markers. Each discovery reinforced the authenticity of Bishop's account and led her deeper into a part of her property she rarely visited, a densely wooded area near the property's northern boundary, where the terrain became rocky and steep. The final marker, a stone with the same symbol but inverted, stood beside a formation of 3 large boulders arranged in a rough triangle. According to Bishop, these boulders had been deliberately positioned to mark the entrance to a small cavern that his committee had enlarged and reinforced to serve as their cache. Sarah examined the boulders skeptically. They appeared completely natural and firmly embedded in the earth, with no obvious way to move them or any opening between them. She reread the journal's instructions. When the 3 guardians reveal no passage, look to where light meets shadow at midday, for therein lies the entrance to secrets kept. Checking her watch, she realized it was approaching noon. As the sun climbed higher, she observed how the shadows of the boulders shifted across the ground. At precisely 12 minutes past noon, the shadows aligned to create a dark arrow that pointed to a patch of ground covered with what appeared to be ordinary forest debris. Sarah began clearing away the leaves and twigs, then the loose soil beneath. After digging down about 8 inches, her trowel struck something solid that produced a hollow metallic sound. Further excavation revealed an iron trapdoor approximately 2 feet square, its surface corroded but intact, with a small keyhole positioned at its center. Her hands trembling slightly, Sarah removed the brass key from her backpack. The same. A key found in the wooden box alongside the journal. It fit perfectly into the ancient lock. With considerable effort, she turned the key and heard a dull click as internal mechanisms, remarkably preserved, released their hold. The trapdoor resisted, at first sealed by centuries of compression and encroaching root systems. Sarah leveraged her weight against it, pulling upward with increasing force until suddenly it gave way with a shower of dirt and a groan of protesting metal hinges. Cool, damp air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying the musty scent of confined earth and something else, the unmistakable smell of old paper and leather. Sarah directed her flashlight into the opening, revealing a short ladder leading down into a small chamber, reinforced with fieldstone walls and timber supports. As she prepared to descend, the distant sound of voices and breaking branches reached her ears. Someone else was moving through the woods, approaching her location with purpose. Sarah quickly doused her flashlight and crouched beside the open trapdoor, suddenly aware of her vulnerability and the questionable legality of excavating a potential historical site without permits. The voices grew closer, at least 2 men engaged, in professional conversation, mentioning satellite imaging, property boundaries, and anomalous formations. One voice instructed the other to secure the perimeter once we locate the entrance. With heart pounding, Sarah faced a critical decision: close the trapdoor and pretend she'd never found it, potentially losing access to whatever Bishop and his committee had hidden, or descend into the unknown chamber, pulling the door closed behind her and hoping it wouldn't be discovered. Either way, it was clear she was no longer the only one searching for Nathaniel Bishop's revolutionary secrets. Sarah's decision came with the sudden clarity of instinct rather than deliberation. Slipping her backpack on securely, she lowered herself onto the ladder, descending into the underground chamber while carefully gripping the trapdoor's underside. With a final glance at the forest above, she pulled the heavy iron door closed over her head, plunging herself into complete darkness except for the thin seam of light around the trapdoor's edges. The voices above grew louder, now accompanied by the electronic beeping of what sounded like detection equipment. Sarah held her breath, suspended on the ladder in the darkness as footsteps crunched through forest debris directly overhead. A man's voice, clinical and authoritative, spoke, almost directly above her. "The GPR is showing an anomaly in this area, approximately 8 feet down. Density variations consistent with a man-made cavity." Government, Sarah thought, remembering the black SUV with federal plates. Whatever Bishop had hidden was significant, enough to warrant official interest 2 centuries later. She waited, motionless, as the footsteps circled the area above. "Area looks recently disturbed," a second voice noted. "Someone's been digging. Expand the search. They might still be nearby." Only when the voices and footsteps receded did Sarah dare to switch on her flashlight, revealing her surroundings for the first time. She had descended into a chamber, roughly 12 feet square, with fieldstone walls and a ceiling reinforced by timber beams, remarkably preserved in the cool, dry conditions. The earthen floor had been covered with flat stones to create a level surface, and against the far wall stood a large wooden cabinet with a small table beside it. Sarah moved cautiously across the chamber, her flashlight beam revealing decades of undisturbed dust, but no footprints save her own. This place had remained sealed since its creation, untouched by human presence for centuries. The cabinet was secured with a simple wooden latch, rather than a lock. Its contents evidently protected more by secrecy of location than additional barriers. Sarah opened it carefully, revealing several wooden crates, leather document portfolios, and what appeared to be rolled maps secured with faded ribbons. "Oh my God," she whispered, the historian in her recognizing the significance of such pristine Revolutionary-era artifacts. This wasn't just a hidden storage space. It was a perfectly preserved time capsule from the nation's founding. Sarah selected one of the leather portfolios first, opening it on the small table to reveal a collection of letters. The topmost document, written on heavy parchment with faded ink, bore a signature that made her gasp audibly: George Washington. The letter, dated April 1779, was addressed to the Committee of Preservation and authorized them to secure those artifacts and documents deemed by this council to represent both opportunity and peril to our cause, until such time as their revelation serves, rather than endangers the Republic. With trembling hands, Sarah examined another document, a manifest listing the chamber's contents. According to this inventory, the wooden crates contained artifacts recovered from a British merchant vessel captured off Massachusetts in 1778. The ship had been carrying items confiscated from private European collections, destined for study by British scholars. The manifest described these artifacts in tantalizing but cryptic terms. Pre-Columbian charts of Atlantic passages and North American coastlines, correspondence between Norse explorers and native peoples, transcribed by monastic scribes circa 1100, and most intriguingly, metallurgical specimens demonstrating advanced knowledge inconsistent with native development, bearing markings of Norse and possibly Iberian origin, predating accepted historical contact by centuries. If authentic, these items would fundamentally challenge the established historical narrative of European discovery of North America. The official history, the one Sarah had studied and taught, would require significant revision. The question that immediately struck her was why such historically Significant artifacts would be deliberately hidden rather than preserved in recognized institutions. The answer came in another document, a personal letter from Benjamin Franklin to Nathaniel Bishop, explaining the strategic importance of controlling this historical narrative during the vulnerable early years of American independence. Should these artifacts become known, Franklin wrote, they would immediately draw renewed European interest in our territories, potentially providing pretext for claims based on prior discovery. In our present state, we can ill afford to fight diplomatic battles on yet another front. These truths must wait for a time when our nation stands strong enough to face them without peril. Sarah sat heavily on a small wooden stool, processing the implications. The Founding Fathers had deliberately suppressed historical evidence for reasons of national security, creating an alternate historical narrative that better served their geopolitical objectives. Movement above interrupted her thoughts. The searchers were returning. Sarah quickly returned the documents to their portfolio, her mind racing. She needed more time to properly document these findings before revealing them to whoever was searching above. Her flashlight beam caught something unexpected. A narrow passage in the corner of the chamber, partially concealed behind the cabinet. According to Bishop's journal, this was supposed to be a sealed room, not a tunnel. Yet there it was, a passage just wide enough for a person leading away into darkness. With the sounds of methodical searching growing louder overhead, Sarah made her second critical decision of the day. Gathering the most important documents, Washington's letter, Franklin's explanation, and the artifact manifest, she secured them in her backpack alongside Bishop's journal. Then, with a final glance at the chamber that had protected American secrets for centuries, she ducked into the unexpected passage and followed it into the unknown. The passage narrowed as Sarah progressed, forcing her to crouch lower with each step. The rough-hewn walls transitioned from fieldstone to natural bedrock, suggesting she was following a modified natural formation rather than an entirely man-made tunnel. Her flashlight beam revealed occasional tool marks where the passage had been widened, but otherwise nature had done most of the work. After approximately 30 yards of careful navigation, the low ceiling suddenly opened into a larger, natural cavern. Sarah's flashlight couldn't penetrate its full dimensions, but the echoing drip of water suggested significant size. The air felt different here, cooler and damper than the preserved chamber behind her. "This wasn't in Bishop's journal," she whispered, her voice creating subtle echoes. Either Bishop had been unaware of this extension, or he had deliberately omitted it from his records. Perhaps the most sensitive secrets required an additional layer of concealment. Sarah followed a natural path along the cavern's edge, her light revealing occasional formations of stalactites and stalagmites, indicating this was a much older natural system than the historical chamber. The ground sloped gently downward, taking her deeper beneath her family's property. After several minutes of cautious exploration, her beam caught something decidedly unnatural among the stone formations. A metal box, approximately 2 feet square, positioned on a natural stone shelf. Unlike the historical artifacts in the main chamber, this container was made of brass with a patina suggesting great age, but its construction seemed almost modern in its precision. Sarah approached it cautiously. No lock secured it, only a simple latch mechanism that released with gentle pressure. Inside, nestled in what appeared to be preserved animal hide, lay a collection of objects unlike anything she had expected. A stone tablet covered with unfamiliar script, several small metal objects that resembled navigational tools, but with unconventional markings, and a leather-bound volume smaller than Bishop's journal, but far older in appearance. This second journal, when carefully opened, revealed pages of vellum covered with elaborate script in what Sarah recognized as medieval Latin, interspersed with diagrams of coastlines, celestial observations, and what appeared to be maps of settlements. The date, inscribed on the first page, 1107 AD, preceded Columbus by nearly 4 centuries. Pre-Columbian contact, Sarah breathed, the historical implications staggering. The document appeared to be the journal of a Norse explorer, chronicling not just brief landings along the coast, but established trading relationships with indigenous populations and seasonal settlements that had lasted decades. A distant metallic sound from the direction of the entrance chamber snapped Sarah from her historical reverie back to present danger. The government team had found the trapdoor. Their voices, though indistinct, echoed through the passage she had followed. Sarah quickly photographed several pages of the medieval journal with her phone, then carefully returned it to the brass container alongside the other artifacts. Much as she longed to bring these priceless items with her, doing so would be both legally questionable and potentially destructive without proper preservation techniques. The photographs would have to suffice as evidence until she could return under more favorable circumstances. But where to go now? The passage she had followed appeared to dead end in this natural cavern. Sarah swept her flashlight around the perimeter more desperately now, searching for any continuation. The beam reflected off something in the far corner, a metal rung, embedded in the rock wall, and above it another. A ladder leading upward into a narrow vertical shaft. With no other options and the sounds of exploration growing closer, Sarah began to climb. The metal rungs, though ancient, held firm as she ascended nearly 20 feet before encountering what felt like wooden planking overhead. She pushed upward with one hand while maintaining her grip with the other, and to her relief, the barrier moved relatively easily, releasing a shower of dirt and debris. Sarah emerged into what appeared to be an abandoned root cellar, its walls lined with decaying wooden shelves and the remnants of ancient storage crocks. A steep set of stone steps led upward to a weathered wooden door. Climbing the steps and cautiously testing the door, she found it swollen with age, but eventually yielded to her pressure. Sunlight momentarily blinded her as she emerged into open air, finding herself behind a crumbling stone foundation approximately half a mile from where she had entered the underground chamber. She recognized this location as the remains of the original Caldwell homestead, abandoned when her ancestors built the current farmhouse in the 1850s. Sarah quickly oriented herself and set off toward the main farm buildings, taking a circuitous route through woodland to avoid potential observers. Her mind raced with the historical implications of what she had discovered, alongside very practical concerns about the government team currently exploring beneath her property. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah secured the door and quickly downloaded the photographs from her phone to her laptop, creating multiple backup copies on different drives. Then she spread out her family's historical documents, deeds, letters, and journals passed down through generations of Caldwells, searching for any mention of Nathaniel Bishop or the original homestead's root cellar. Among her great-grandfather's papers, she found a surveyor's map from 1872 that showed something promising: a series of underground streams and natural caverns beneath the northern section of the property, marked with a notation, unsuitable for construction due to subsurface conditions. Historical sensitivity advised. They knew, Sarah realized. Each generation knew something was down there, but they protected it. The preservation of such secrets would have become more challenging in the modern era of satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and systematic historical research, explaining why the government team had finally zeroed in on her property. Vehicle approaching outside drew her attention. Through the kitchen window, Sarah watched as the black SUV from the previous night pulled into her driveway. 2 men in casual clothing that nonetheless screamed federal agent stepped out, followed by a third figure that caught Sarah completely by surprise. Dr. Eleanor Harrington, her former doctoral advisor at Amherst, now apparently consulting for whoever these government representatives were. Sarah's relationship with Dr. Harrington had been complex. The professor had initially mentored her promising academic career, then expressed profound disappointment when Sarah abandoned her studies to save the family farm. Seeing her now, apparently involved in whatever investigation was targeting Ironwood Farm, added yet another layer of complication. As the trio approached her front door, Sarah hastily gathered the most sensitive materials, Bishop's journal, the photographs of the medieval text and Washington's letter, and secured them in her father's old gun safe in the hallway closet. Whatever happened next, she needed to ensure the evidence survived. The firm knock at her door came just as she closed the closet. Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself and rehearsing her planned ignorance of any historical significance to her property beyond what was commonly known. Then, with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to handling unwanted farm equipment salespeople, she opened the door to face the federal agents and her former mentor. Dr. Caldwell, the lead agent, greeted her, using her academic title rather than her married name, a detail that immediately suggested they had thoroughly researched her background. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the historical significance of your property. May we come in?" "Of course," Sarah replied with a carefully neutral expression, gesturing them inside. "Though I usually just go by Mrs. Caldwell these days, the doctoral work feels like another lifetime ago." The lead agent, a trim man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, introduced himself as Special Agent Thomas Kirby from the Department of Historical Preservation and National Security, a government division Sarah had never heard of. His younger colleague, Agent Davis, remained silent, his attention methodically scanning the farmhouse interior. "And I believe you already know Dr. Harrington," Kirby added. "Sarah," Dr. Harrington nodded coolly, her expression professional, but with an undercurrent of something Sarah couldn't quite identify, disappointment perhaps, or suspicion. "It's been, 5 years now?" "Almost 6, Sarah corrected, leading them to the kitchen table, the only space large enough for a conversation. "Can I offer anyone coffee? I just made a fresh pot before you arrived." The domestic gesture felt absurdly normal against the surreal circumstances. "No, thank you," Kirby declined for the group, placing a thin leather portfolio on the table. "We won't take much of your time. We're conducting a historical survey of properties in this region with potential significance to early American history." Sarah maintained her composure as they seated themselves, though her heart rate accelerated. Ironwood Farm does date back to the Revolutionary era, but I'm afraid there's nothing particularly noteworthy about it, just a typical New England farm that's managed to stay in the same family for generations. Kirby's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, we have reason to believe your property might contain historically significant artifacts. Specifically, we're investigating reports of colonial-era documents potentially hidden on these premises by a Revolutionary War operative named Nathaniel Bishop." The directness of his statement momentarily caught Sarah off guard. They weren't simply fishing, they had specific information. "Nathaniel Bishop?" she echoed, allowing genuine puzzlement to color her tone. "The name doesn't ring any bells. If he had a connection to Ironwood, it's not part of our family law." Dr. Harrington leaned forward, her academic demeanor shifting to something more personal. "Sarah, your dissertation work focused on information networks during the Revolutionary War. You specifically mentioned Bishop in your proposal as an understudied figure who served as a liaison between Washington's intelligence apparatus and local resistance groups. I abandoned that research direction years ago," Sarah responded evenly. "When my father fell ill, I turned the dissertation toward agricultural history instead, something I could research while running the farm. Yet, here you are, living on property with a direct connection to your original subject," Harrington pressed. Agent Davis spoke for the first time. "We noticed construction work on your barn. Found anything interesting during the renovation?" The question confirmed Sarah's suspicion that they were already aware of the journal's discovery. Perhaps one of the construction workers had reported it, or maybe they had surveillance in place before the barn wall was ever opened. Just typical old barn findings. Horseshoes, hand-forged nails, a few broken tools, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "My contractors are preserving anything that might have historical interest." Kirby opened his portfolio, removing a satellite image of Ironwood Farm with several areas marked in red, including the location of the underground chamber Sarah had discovered hours earlier. "Mrs. Caldwell, we have technology that can detect subsurface anomalies. We've identified several man-made structures beneath your property that don't appear on any official records." He slid the image across the table. "We're particularly interested in this formation near the northern boundary." Sarah studied the image with what she hoped appeared as genuine curiosity rather than recognition. "There are old mine shafts and root cellars scattered throughout this region. Many weren't properly documented, especially those abandoned before modern record-keeping. This particular structure appears to have been accessed very recently," Kirby noted, his tone hardening slightly. Today, in fact, the conversation had reached its critical juncture. Sarah measured her words carefully. "Agent Kirby, what exactly is your department's interest in my property? If there are historical artifacts here, wouldn't the State Historical Society or Smithsonian be the appropriate authorities, not national security?" Dr. Harrington exchanged a glance with Kirby before answering. "Sarah, some historical discoveries have implications beyond academic interest. Certain Revolutionary-era documents contain sensitive information about founding government structures, territorial negotiations, and intelligence networks that remain relevant to national security." "Documents hidden by Nathaniel Bishop," Kirby added, "may include classified correspondence that could impact modern international relations. We need to secure and analyze these materials before they potentially enter the public domain inappropriately." The explanation contained enough plausibility to be believable, but Sarah sensed deeper motives. The medieval journal she had photographed suggested the government's interest likely centered on the pre-Columbian evidence rather than Revolutionary War intelligence. "I see," Sarah nodded, projecting thoughtful consideration. "Well, I certainly want to cooperate with any legitimate historical preservation efforts. What exactly would you need from me?" "Access to your property for a thorough archaeological survey," Kirby replied immediately. "Full disclosure of any historical documents or artifacts already discovered. And a confidentiality agreement regarding this investigation." He produced a multi-page document from his portfolio. "This grants our department temporary access rights to conduct non-invasive surveying, with provisions for compensation should any excavation be required." Sarah accepted the document, pretending to review it while her mind raced through options. Signing would give them legal authority to search her entire property, likely leading to the discovery of both underground chambers. Refusing would only escalate their suspicions and probably result in a court order anyway. She needed a third alternative. "I'd like my lawyer to review this before signing," she said, setting the document aside. "And I'd want assurances that any historical artifacts found on Ironwood property would be properly credited to the Caldwell family legacy." "Of course," Kirby agreed smoothly, "though we would appreciate expedited consideration. Historical preservation is time-sensitive, especially with your ongoing construction potentially disturbing sensitive areas. Dr. Harrington leaned forward. Sarah, this could be the academic discovery you were working toward years ago. Your dissertation could finally be completed with this material. The appeal to her abandoned academic ambitions was cleverly targeted but transparent. Sarah maintained her composed expression while formulating her strategy. I appreciate that, Eleanor. Let me speak with my attorney tomorrow morning, and I'll have an answer for you by noon. In the meantime, I'm happy to show you around the property, the areas that are safe for visitors at least. The barn construction site is off-limits due to insurance requirements. The compromise seemed to satisfy Kirby, who clearly recognized pushing too hard might backfire. That's reasonable. We'll return tomorrow at noon. In the meantime, we'll continue our preliminary survey from public access points. As she escorted them to the door, Agent Davis hung back slightly. One last question, Mrs. Caldwell. Have you noticed anyone else showing interest in your property recently? Other researchers, historians, maybe collectors, making unexpected offers. To purchase? The question confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion that the government team might not be the only party interested in Bishop's hidden treasures. No one beyond the usual developers, always looking to convert farmland to subdivisions, she answered truthfully. After they departed, Sarah watched through the window as their SUV pulled away, then immediately reached for her phone. The federal team would undoubtedly be monitoring her calls, so contacting authorities or academic institutions was out of the question. Instead, she needed someone with both historical expertise and discretion, someone not easily intimidated by government pressure. She scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years, Dr. Marcus Westfield, her undergraduate thesis advisor and a renowned expert in early American history whose contempt for government interference in academic research was legendary in historical circles. If anyone could help her navigate this situation while preserving the historical truths she'd discovered, it would be Westfield. As she pressed the call button, Sarah noticed a silver sedan slowing as it passed her driveway. Neither local nor a government, but clearly interested in Ironwood Farm. It seemed Nathaniel Bishop's secrets were attracting multiple parties to her quiet corner of New England. Dr. Marcus Westfield's gravelly voice answered on the third ring. Westfield here, who's calling? Marcus, it's Sarah Caldwell, formerly Peterson. I was your advisee at Sarah. Of course I remember you. Brilliant work on communication networks in colonial resistance movements. Then you vanished from academia. Farming, wasn't it? Sarah smiled despite herself. At 73, Westfield remained sharp as ever, his encyclopedic memory intact. Yes, Ironwood Farm in western Massachusetts, and I need your help with something sensitive, something historical, that intersects with national security concerns. A pause. You've found something significant, very predating Columbus with Norse origins, plus Revolutionary War documents hidden by Nathaniel Bishop, yes, that Bishop, under direct orders from Washington and Franklin. Westfield's breath caught audibly. Good Lord, you're certain of authenticity? The physical evidence is compelling, and I've secured photographs and some original documents, but federal agents are already here. Department of Historical Preservation and National Security. They're surveying my property and returning tomorrow for formal access. Never heard of that department, Westfield muttered. Sounds like one of those shadow agencies that appears whenever something challenges established narratives. Sarah, you need to be extremely careful. Can you come to me in Cambridge? Sarah glanced out the window. The silver sedan had returned, now parked at a distance along the rural road. I'm being watched. They're at my property line with surveying equipment, and now there's another vehicle I don't recognize. Listen carefully. Westfield's tone turned urgent. Those pre-Columbian artifacts have profound implications for territorial claims, indigenous Rights litigation and international maritime law, the revolutionary documents likely contain additional sensitive information about national founding principles the government would prefer to control. You've stumbled into a historical and political minefield. What should I do? Secure what evidence you have, digitize everything immediately, and create multiple backups. I'm going to make arrangements with colleagues who can help authenticate and protect the historical record. You'll need to... A sharp click interrupted the call, followed by silence. Sarah checked her phone. No service, despite having full bars moments earlier. A targeted interruption, almost certainly. Moving quickly, Sarah collected the materials from her father's gun safe and spread them on the kitchen table. Using her digital camera rather than her phone, she methodically photographed every page of Bishop's journal, Washington's letter, and her own notes, transferring the images directly to an SD card. She then wrapped the physical documents in protective plastic and placed them in a waterproof hiking container from her camping supplies. The question was where to hide them now. Federal agents would have equipment to detect metal safes or disturbed earth. She needed somewhere both unexpected and historically appropriate. Sarah's gaze fell on the large, antique butter churn that served as a decorative piece in her kitchen corner, a family heirloom that had been continuously displayed in the Caldwell farmhouse for generations. Its wooden construction wouldn't trigger metal detectors, and its status as a permanent fixture made it unlikely to be examined closely. Working quickly, she removed the churn's lid and the wooden paddle inside, creating a hollow cylinder large enough for the document container. After securing her precious cargo inside, she replaced the paddle and lid, then returned to her laptop to create digital backups. Within minutes, she had copied all photographs to both a cloud storage account and a second SD card, which she hid inside the hollow base of a table lamp. As darkness fell, Sarah's unease grew. The federal team had established a small outpost at her property boundary, visible lights indicating continued activity despite the late hour. The silver sedan remained in its distant observation position. She was effectively trapped inside her own home, under surveillance from at least 2 different groups. Her cell phone service suddenly returned, followed immediately by a text message from an unknown number. Bishop's legacy extends beyond your improperty. Others seek what you found. Trust no one claiming government authority. Whether M was Marcus Westfield or someone else entirely, the warning only confirmed her suspicions. She needed more information before deciding her next move. Retreating to her office, Sarah pulled out the farm's original deed and property maps, some dating back to the 1700s. If there were other hidden chambers or tunnels beneath ironwood, perhaps. There were subtle clues in these documents that generations of Caldwells had preserved. Hours into her research, Sarah discovered something peculiar, a surveyor's notation from 1798 marking a natural feature of significance at the junction between Ironwood Farm and the adjacent property, now the Whitaker Preserve, a nature conservation area. The mark corresponded to a location where Bishop's journal mentioned a secondary contingency should the primary chamber be compromised. If Bishop had established another cache site, it might contain duplicates of the critical documents or potentially additional artifacts not stored beneath her property. But reaching this location would require crossing active surveillance to access the neighboring preserve. As Sarah contemplated this new information, her laptop chimed with an incoming video call. Michael, her husband, calling from his deployment. With federal agents monitoring all communications, she couldn't risk telling him about her discoveries. Yet his military expertise might be exactly what she needed to navigate this increasingly dangerous situation. Sarah accepted the call, composing her features into a smile that betrayed none of the day's extraordinary events. "Hi, honey," she greeted him, already forming a plan to communicate in their private shorthand, developed during previous deployments. "You won't believe what a day it's been at the farm." The barn renovation is going well, Sarah told Michael, maintaining a casual tone while her eyes communicated something entirely different. Luis found some interesting old timbers. Reminds me of that situation in Kandahar. Remember how we had to relocate those historical artifacts during the museum restoration? Michael's expression shifted subtly, recognition flickering in his eyes. Kandahar had been their code word for situations requiring covert action during his first deployment. The reference to museum artifacts was clear enough. She'd found something of historical significance that needed protection. Sounds challenging, he replied carefully. Using local resources or bringing in specialists? Both. The Historical Society is interested. She tilted her head meaningfully. But I'm also consulting with Professor Westfield from my university. Days. Westfield, the stubborn old historian who refused government funding on principle? Michael's quick understanding confirmed why they worked so well as a team. Sounds like you've got competing interests in your renovation project. Exactly. And the weather forecast is concerning surveillance conditions through tomorrow. Michael nodded, his military training allowing him to process her meaning without explicit statements. If I were managing that project, I'd secure the most valuable materials off-site before any storms hit, perhaps with trusted local help. Like Evan Davies, Sarah suggested, referring to their neighbor whose property bordered the Whitaker Preserve. Perfect choice. His background in forest management gives him excellent navigational skills. Michael paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "You know, my buddy Jason from the unit is on leave in Boston this week. Former archaeological survey specialist. I could have him drive out to help assess those old timbers." Sarah's spirits lifted at this unexpected resource. Jason Miller had served with Michael in counterintelligence operations before specializing in archaeological site protection in conflict zones, precisely the expertise she needed. That would be wonderful. The sooner the better. I'll contact him immediately after we hang up. He could be there by morning. Michael's expression grew serious. Sarah, if this renovation is attracting unwanted attention, don't hesitate to implement emergency protocols. Their shared language for true emergencies, abandon the property and meet at their predetermined safe location in Vermont. It hasn't reached that point, she assured him. Just competing contractors trying to take control of the project. They wrapped up their conversation with personal updates and expressions of love that were entirely genuine, despite the subtext running beneath their words. After ending the call, Sarah immediately texted Evan Davies, "Need help with fallen tree near north boundary tomorrow morning. Historical oak we discussed last month. 5 a.m. too early?" Evan's reply came quickly. "Never. Too early for historical preservation. We'll bring equipment." Sarah's plan was taking shape. With Evan's help, she could access the Whitaker Preserve without crossing the surveilled property line, potentially reaching Bishop's secondary cache site before the federal team expanded their search area. Meanwhile, Michael's friend Jason would provide experienced backup and potentially a secure method to transport artifacts if necessary. She spent the next hour gathering supplies, hiking boots, flashlight, compass, her father's old Polaroid camera, immune to digital tracking, and basic excavation tools. Everything went into her everyday farm backpack, nothing that would appear suspicious if discovered. As midnight approached, Sarah noticed the silver sedan finally departing, though the federal team maintained their position at the property boundary. A second government vehicle had arrived, suggesting a shift change for continuous surveillance. Setting her alarm for 4:30 a.m., Sarah tried to rest while formulating contingency plans. Bishop's colonial-era secrets had remained hidden for centuries. She was determined they wouldn't be buried again, or worse, selectively edited before reaching the public. The pre-dawn air carried a chill as Sarah slipped out her back door at 4:40 a.m., keeping the farmhouse between herself and the federal surveillance. Position. A quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate the familiar path toward the equipment shed, where she stored irrigation supplies and maintenance tools. Evan Davies was already waiting, his weathered face barely visible in the dim light. At 67, the retired Forestry Service veteran moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating woodlands. "Morning, Sarah," he whispered. "Michael's friend arrived about an hour ago. He's waiting at my place." This was unexpected but welcome news. "Jason got here quickly. Military efficiency," Evan nodded. "Said something about the situation being time-sensitive from a preservation standpoint. Brought some interesting equipment too." They moved silently across the eastern pasture, skirting the tree line to remain concealed from the road. Evan led her through a narrow game trail that connected Ironwood Farm to his property, without crossing the surveilled northern boundary where the federal team had established their observation post. Jason Miller waited at Evan's back porch, his military, bearing evident despite civilian clothing. He extended his hand to Sarah. "Mrs. Caldwell, Michael explained you've encountered artifacts of significant historical interest that require secure authentication." "That's putting it mildly," Sarah replied, grateful for the precise military language that conveyed much in few words. "Pre-Columbian evidence of Norse settlement on American soil, plus Revolutionary War documents that contradict established historical narratives. Federal agents are already involved." Jason nodded, unsurprised. "I've encountered similar situations in the Middle East, archaeological findings that challenge territorial claims or national origin stories. Governments typically respond by classifying the discovery until they can control the narrative." "Exactly what's happening here," Sarah confirmed. "We need to document the secondary site before they expand their search perimeter." With Evan guiding their approach through the conservation land, they reached the boundary marker Sarah had identified from the old survey maps. A lightning-struck oak that had partially regrown into a distinctive forked shape. According to Bishop's journal, this landmark had existed even in colonial times, making it an ideal reference point for a hidden cache. Using the coordinates triangulated from her research, Sarah led them to a small rocky outcropping approximately 50 yards from the boundary marker. Unlike the elaborate hidden chamber beneath her property, this location appeared to be a simple cache site, the kind resistance fighters might use for emergency supplies or communications. Jason produced specialized equipment from his backpack, a compact, ground-penetrating radar device and a metal detector designed for archaeological surveys. "Non-invasive preliminary assessment," he explained. "If something's buried here, we'll find it without disturbing the site integrity." Within minutes, his methodical scan produced results. Hollow space approximately 2 feet down, metal container roughly 14 by 9 inches, consistent with document storage practices from the Revolutionary period. Using hand tools to carefully excavate, they uncovered a small metal box sealed with beeswax to protect against moisture. The box's construction was distinctly colonial era, with hand-forged hinges and a simple clasp mechanism rather than a lock. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she carefully opened it, revealing contents that exceeded her expectations. A second journal in Bishop's handwriting, a sealed packet of letters, and most significantly, a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be ancient coins marked with Norse runes. "Physical evidence," Jason observed quietly. "Undeniable proof of pre-Columbian contact." The journal, when carefully examined by flashlight, revealed Bishop's true mandate from Washington and Franklin, not merely to hide artifacts, but to establish a permanent historical repository accessible only to those who could decipher the complex series of clues embedded in seemingly ordinary colonial documents. The final page contained the most shocking revelation. By agreement of the Continental Congress, signed in secret session, these truths are preserved for a future time when their revelation serves rather than harms our republic. The accurate history of this continent, predating Columbus by centuries, shall remain the province of those who value truth above political advantage. Beneath this text was a list of signatures that took Sarah's breath away. Not just Washington and Franklin, but Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton, the founding fathers, united in perhaps the most significant historical concealment ever orchestrated. Dawn broke as they carefully documented the contents of Bishop's secondary cache. Jason methodically photographed each artifact with a specialized camera, while Sarah transcribed key passages from the newly discovered journal. Evan maintained watch, positioned where he could observe any approach through the conservation land. Federal vehicle moving along the access road, Evan reported suddenly, his voice low but urgent. 2 individuals on foot headed this direction. Jason swiftly but carefully returned the artifacts to their container. They must have expanded their search perimeter or tracked our movement somehow. We need more time to document everything, Sarah insisted, still transcribing the journal's most critical revelations. Time we don't have, Jason countered, sealing his camera in a waterproof case. Priority is securing what we've already documented, while maintaining plausible deniability about our purpose here. Sarah made a quick decision. Evan, take Jason and the documentation back to your property. I'll replace the cache and create a diversion. That puts you at considerable risk, Jason objected. I'm just a farmer checking her property line after. Reports of trespassing, Sarah replied, already returning the journal to the metal box. Nothing suspicious about that. Reluctantly, Jason handed Sarah his spare phone. Encrypted, use it if you need extraction. The military terminology wasn't lost on her. This had escalated beyond historical research into something resembling an intelligence operation. As Evan and Jason retreated through the underbrush, Sarah carefully reburied the cache, disguising the disturbed earth with fallen leaves and branches. She had just finished when voices became audible. Agent Kirby and Dr. Harrington approaching. From different directions than expected, Sarah straightened, adopting a surprised expression as they came into view. Agent Kirby, Dr. Harrington, what brings you onto conservation land at this hour? Kirby's expression hardened when he saw her. Mrs. Caldwell, interesting coincidence finding you here, over a mile from your farmhouse at dawn, near where our equipment detected a subsurface anomaly. I regularly walk my property boundaries, Sarah replied calmly. There's been trespassing recently, probably just hikers from the conservation area getting lost, but I like to check. Dr. Harrington studied the ground near Sarah's feet with professional interest. The soil here appears recently disturbed. I was checking for fence post rot, Sarah improvised. The boundary markers in this section are over 50 years old. Kirby didn't bother concealing his skepticism. Our meeting isn't until noon, yet here you are, investigating the exact location our team flagged for examination. Your team established surveillance on my property without permission, Sarah countered, her composure turning to righteous indignation. You've been monitoring my calls, tracking my movements on my own land. I have every right to inspect my property boundaries. National security concerns override certain privacy considerations, Kirby stated flatly. Sarah crossed her arms. You need a court order for that, Agent Kirby, not just a department I've never heard of and can't find in any government directory. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Davis, slightly breathless. Sir, we have a situation at the farm. Miller's team has arrived with documentation. Kirby's expression flickered with recognition at the name. Miller, from Artifact Protection Unit? Sarah maintained a neutral expression, despite her surprise. Jason's background was apparently more significant than Michael had indicated. Yes, sir. They're claiming jurisdiction under Historical Preservation Act Section 7. Dr. Harrington paled visibly. That's impossible. That section hasn't been invoked since the Dead Sea Scrolls controversy, Kirby finished grimly. It appears we have competing federal interests here. He turned to Sarah with newfound respect or wariness. Mrs. Caldwell, it seems your historical discovery has attracted attention at the highest levels. The dynamics had shifted dramatically. What began as a simple hidden journal discovery had escalated into an interagency conflict over historical evidence with profound national implications. Sarah met Kirby's gaze steadily. Perhaps it's time we discuss the actual historical significance of what's been discovered here, rather than pretending this is about property surveys. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the newly constructed Caldwell Historical Research Center, watching as climate-controlled display cases were carefully installed by museum specialists. The converted barn that had once concealed Nathaniel Bishop's journal now housed the first public exhibition of selected pre-Columbian artifacts and Revolutionary-era documents discovered at Ironwood Farm. The negotiated resolution that followed. The confrontation at the property boundary had been complex, involving multiple federal agencies, academic institutions, and international historical organizations. Jason Miller's intervention had proven decisive. His position with the little-known Artifact Protection Unit, a specialized division tasked with preserving historically significant items from government classification, had elevated the discovery from classified material to protected heritage. Dr. Harrington approached. Their relationship transformed from the tension of that confrontation into cautious, professional collaboration. The Norse navigation instruments are drawing significant interest from Scandinavian museums. They've requested a temporary loan once the initial exhibition concludes. Sarah nodded. I think that would be appropriate. This discovery belongs to global historical understanding, not just American history. The compromise that had emerged after weeks of negotiation represented a balanced approach to the revolutionary findings. The pre-Columbian evidence of Norse settlement would be fully disclosed to the public, challenging the Columbus-centric narrative, but enhancing understanding of early transatlantic contact. The more sensitive Revolutionary War documents, particularly those revealing the Founding Fathers' deliberate historical concealment, would be released gradually with appropriate historical context to prevent political weaponization of the founders' decisions. Ironwood Farm itself had been transformed, with grants from historical preservation organizations and a trust established to protect the archaeological significance of the property. The struggling family farm had evolved into a working historical site. The original agricultural operations continued under Sarah's management, but now supplemented by educational programs and carefully regulated archaeological research. Michael, home from deployment and standing beside her, squeezed her hand. Your grandfather would be proud. 7 generations of Caldwells preserved this land without knowing exactly why, just trusting that it mattered. They knew something was here worth protecting, Sarah reflected. Each generation maintained the farm, kept the original documents, preserved the landmarks Bishop used in his directions. They were stewards without knowing the full significance of what they guarded. Through the research center's windows, Sarah could see Agent Kirby speaking with Dr. Westfield, near the site of the original underground chamber, now properly excavated and reinforced for limited scholarly access. Their unlikely partnership, the government agent and the independent academic, symbolized the balanced approach that had ultimately prevailed. The first school groups arrive next week, Sarah noted, watching workers install interactive displays explaining 12th century Norse trading practices with indigenous populations. Children will learn that history is more complex and interconnected than they've been taught. And that truth eventually finds its way to light, Michael added, even if it takes centuries. Sarah's academic career had come full circle. She had completed her dissertation using the Bishop materials, receiving her doctorate from Amherst with Dr. Harrington's support. Now, instead of choosing between academia and farming, she had integrated both into a new purpose that honored her family legacy while advancing historical understanding. The leather-bound journal that had started everything occupied a central display case, carefully preserved yet accessible to researchers through high-resolution digital scanning. Beside it lay the Norse coins, tangible evidence of a historical narrative that had been deliberately concealed for strategic reasons, yet preserved for future discovery. As visitors arrived for the pre-opening reception, academics, government, officials, local farmers, and descendants of the families mentioned in Bishop's journals, Sarah reflected on how one reluctant discovery in an old barn wall had not only transformed her understanding of history, but had given Ironwood Farm and her family a new purpose as guardians of historical truth. The Founding Fathers had hidden these artifacts not to deny truth permanently, but to protect a fragile young nation until it was strong enough to face complex historical realities. Now, in the 21st century, that time had finally arrived, and Sarah Caldwell, farmer and historian, had become the bridge between a hidden past and a more historically honest future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.